Hello sweet reading friends and welcome back to my channel. August and September were probably some of my best and worst reading months I have ever had. In August I got married and then in September I did have my honeymoon trip. So I think just between like the busyness of all that, being obviously very distracted with all that, I don't know if like that put me in a slump or what it was, but I had so many DNFs and so many 4 and 5-star reads like within those 2 months. You can definitely tell like when I was in my little slump and then when I was starting to get out of it. But I haven't done a reading wrap up in a very long time. I've been trying to do them like every 2 months because I do read a lot of these books for videos, but there are some books in this video that I'm going to be talking about that I didn't do videos for. So in August and September, and I'm actually going to add in one from October because I did read it at like the very beginning of October. So between all of those, I have 14 books that I will be talking about in this video, and I will be starting with the ones that I did not do for videos specifically. And the first one I have is One of the Girls by Lucy Clark. This one I actually read either right around or right after my bachelorette trip, and this one actually follows a group of girls who are on a bachelorette trip, but things kind of start to go wrong. There's kind of a little bit of drama and somebody ends up dead. This book I gave a 3.75 star. I feel like going into it I thought it was going to be more of a thriller, and it ended up reading more like women's fiction with like some suspense at the end, which I still didn't mind at all. It just was definitely a little bit less exciting as I thought it was going to be, but I still really enjoyed reading about these characters. I really enjoyed seeing like the relationships, and I also really enjoyed the drama. Like, you know when sometimes you read books and there's just drama in it, but it's not necessarily annoying, it's more like entertaining. I feel like that's kind of how this book was for me. And I think also because I was on my bachelorette trip, it just felt very like parallel to my life right now, so that also made it a lot more fun to read. This book is probably perfect for people who are wanting to get into thrillers but don't really like the super spooky intense stuff, because it's very subtle on the thriller part of things. There was tons of lies, tons of secrets, which I love, and it is also told from multiple point of views. So I think it's told from all of the girls' POVs, and I believe there's like 5 of them maybe, which at first I know can be a little bit hard to follow, but I felt like it was pretty easy to follow kind of like once the story picked up a little bit towards like the 25% point. I also listened to part of this on audiobook, so I think that was why it was a tiny bit hard for me to follow, because I wasn't like physically reading each person's point of view. I was listening and it was all mostly the same voice. So that got a little bit confusing for certain parts of it, but when I was reading the physical copy, it wasn't as hard to, I guess, to differentiate because I was like actually looking at the words. The book was a little bit slow paced, but I wasn't necessarily bored. I think the secrets and the lies like kept things very intriguing, even though like not a whole lot of like action was going on. I will say the like climax or like the plot twist intense point wasn't as intense as I like would have hoped, but I felt like the plot twist was pretty good. So overall, I enjoyed this book. I would definitely recommend it, like I said, to people who are like wanting to get into thrillers, or just anyone who's in the mood for like some drama with a little bit of suspense with like a fun vacation element. Next, I read Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. This one I actually read on my way to Portland for my like Portland Booktube girlies trip thing. So I think I got like little glimpses of me reading that in that video, but I don't think I ever did like a full-on review and vlog of like reading this book. So this one I gave a 2.75 star, but not because it was a bad book necessarily, it's because I predicted everything that was happening from the beginning. So this book follows, I believe, 3 siblings, and their mom just passed away, and when they go to kind of like clean out the house and like take care of like the afterward stuff, they end up finding a tape, like a videotape of their parents and a dead body. So throughout this book they're kind of trying to figure out like what the heck happened. Definitely some like family secrets. This book reads kind of slow, and I felt like I said, the plot twist wasn't very interesting because I predicted everything that was going to happen from the beginning. I did kind of like our main character. I feel like all of these characters were unlikable in their own ways, but our main character, I forgot her name, Beth, I think is what it is. I feel like I liked her for the most part. So I don't know, like the characters just weren't like the most likable. The story wasn't as intriguing as I thought it was going to be. So overall, this just wasn't it for me. But this is also another one that I feel like would be really good for people who are wanting to get into thrillers, who don't want to be very spooked, or they just don't want anything like super icky and crazy going on. Like it's just a very, very subtle fiction book with a little suspense. The next book that I read that was not for a video is The Lost Story by Meg Schaefer. And this one follows our 2 to 3 three main characters. We have Jeremy, Rafe, and I believe Emily is the girl's name. Jeremy and Rafe went missing in the woods like years and years and years ago. And then when they finally returned or were found, one of them doesn't remember like anything that happened. And then on the other side of that, we have Emily. And Emily's sister went missing again like years and years and years ago. But Jeremy, one of the boys who went missing, he is now like a person who finds people for a living. So Emily goes to Jeremy because she needs help finding her sister. So Jeremy, Rafe, and Emily kind of go on this adventure to go find her sister. And there's also like a magical enchanted world that's kind of involved. So I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain. This book was marketed for people who love The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. And I will say, I think that this book is very incorrectly marketed because the only tie that this book has to The Chronicles of Narnia is the fact that there's like some other world on the other side of a door. Other than that, it did not have the same like very magical feel as The Chronicles of Narnia did. This book mainly focused on relationships, and as much as I enjoyed that, I just feel like it's marketed very, very incorrectly because I went into it expecting like a very, very magical world, a very magical setting. And this book just extremely fell short for me, which is really sad because it was one of the ones that was like very anticipated for me for this year. I ended up rating it a 3-star because I did really like the characters. I just did not care a whole lot for the storyline. And then the last one that I actually did have like part of it in a video but not all of it was That's Not My Name by Megan Laley. I just recently read this at the end of September and I ended up giving it 5 stars. This book kind of follows 2 different people. We have Drew and then we have a girl who is supposedly named Mary. So at the beginning of the story, on one side we have this girl who woke up on the side of the road. She's completely beaten up. She doesn't remember a single thing about who she is, where she's from, where she is. So a policeman sees her on the side of the road and brings her into the police station where a man comes in claiming to be her father. He has some like school IDs, her birth certificate, like all this stuff to confirm who she is. So because she can't remember anything and the guy has like all these identifying records, the policeman like lets her go with him. So we're following like that story as things like start to go very wrong very quickly with that. And then we are following Drew, who's on the other side of the story, and Drew's girlfriend Lola went missing I think 5 weeks ago, and the whole town thinks that he's to blame for her disappearance. So he is on a mission to prove everybody wrong and prove his innocence. This book was just so bingeable, so fast-paced. I loved it so much. I will say, like, I was also very much in the mood for this book when I picked it up, so I think that's also why I rated it so highly. But it just like kept my heart I had heart palpitations reading this book. But not only was it like very fast-paced, it was also very like heart-wrenching, I guess I would say. Like the ending literally actually made me cry, and I don't cry often in books, but I just felt like this had, I don't know, something like very special to it at the end. And it was just a really good time. This is definitely a really good book for like spooky season and I guess just around Halloween in general. Not that it has like anything to do with Halloween, it just kind of has those like spooky season feels, you know? Okay, now that I've talked about all the books that I did not do videos for, now I'm going to be talking about the books that I did do videos for, and starting with my DNFs. Oh, it's so sad. So sad. I really hate DNFing books, but I am a no BS type of person. Like, if I am not enjoying a book, I will not finish it because I have so many other books that I want to read and I just don't have the time to be consuming content that I'm not enjoying. So my first DNF was surprisingly Happily Never After by Lynn Painter. Now, going into this book, I already heard some like mixed reviews about it, so I didn't have like the highest expectations, but I did expect to like it more than I did. And it's not necessarily that this was a bad book, because it's not. It's still like a cute book. I did read this right after my wedding. I filmed a video where I read wedding themed books for my wedding and honeymoon weeks. So I got 60% of the way through this book and DNF'd it. This book is about our 2 main characters. I do not for the life of me remember their names, but one is a wedding crasher pretty much, and then the other girl also becomes a wedding crasher, so they wedding crash together. She's very anti-love, anti-relationship after her own failed marriage, and I can't even remember where exactly he stands on that, but he doesn't seem like super interested in a relationship either. So I just felt like the whole time throughout this book, they were just so like anti-relationship, just talking how stupid it is, how love doesn't exist, and like all this stuff, like as they're actively falling in love with each other. Huh? And I just feel like nothing, like the first, I would say 25 to 35% of this book was really fun. I really liked our characters. I was having a good time. And then after that point, I feel like literally nothing happened. Like, it was just words on paper. It was the same thing happening every like couple chapters, and like nothing was going on. So I just got so bored with it, and I felt like it was putting me in a slump. So I ended up just DNFing it because I did not want to be in a slump for the remainder of my honeymoon trip. But I ended up being in a slump for the remainder of my honeymoon trip, so that was not fun. So that was my first DNF, and then my second DNF was The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I read this in my Reading the Most Famous Thrillers of All Time video. This book, I don't even know exactly how to describe it. It's about, let me just read a little synopsis. Murder mystery, family saga, love story, and financial intrigue combined into one satisfyingly complex and entertainingly atmospheric novel. Harriet Wenger, a scion of the Sweden's wealthiest families, disappears over 40 years ago. All these years later, her aged uncle continues to seek the truth. He hires Michael Blomkvist, a crusading journalist, recently trapped by libel, I always forget how it's pronounced, conviction, to investigate. He is aided by the pierced and tattooed punk prodigy Elizabeth Salander. Together they tap into a vein of unfathomable iniquity and astonishing corruption. From the beginning, I wasn't ever extremely interested in the story. First of all, this is a very, very long book. It's like nearly 600 pages, I think. The synopsis sounded pretty intriguing. It sounded very, very complex, which the story ended up being extremely complex, and I just felt like at some points it was really hard to follow. I only made it 30% of the way through before I DNF'd it, but the reasons that I DNF'd it, well, were because I was getting so lost within this story. From the beginning, you are introduced to, well, not necessarily introduced, but there are so many names being thrown out that you don't understand who is who and what they have to do with anything, which I know you'll eventually find out, but it was just way too much information to process at one time. I also really hated the fact that the author did this thing where a person has a first name and a last name and a nickname, and we would just always refer to the person by any one of those names. So not one person was ever just constantly referred to by one name, which made it extremely hard to follow again who we were talking about. And then I also did not read trigger warnings going into this book, and there is a lot of very uncomfortable and triggering content that I was just not okay with consuming. So I decided that it would be best to DNF, and I'm so glad that I did, because I ended up watching the movie because I just didn't want to spend hours and hours reading the book when I could just watch a 2-hour film and see like what the hype was about. Yeah, I had to skip over so many parts in the movie, and there was a lot of things in this book and in this movie that I don't agree with and that I really don't like consuming. So I just think this book just was not for me. I know that this book has so many amazing ratings and it is one of the most famous thrillers of all time, but not worth it for me. Absolutely not worth it for me. Okay, so now going into the other books that I read that weren't quite my 5 stars yet, but ones that I rated at least like a 3 to 4 star. So one of the 3 stars that I had was My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. This one I think I also read in maybe my wedding video, because I was like, this is technically wedding themed because it's like my wife. If you like the show Dexter, then I feel like you'll probably like this book. This follows our main character. Well, it really only follows the POV of the husband, but it's about this married couple who pretty much offs people together. We look like a normal couple. We are your neighbors, the parents of your kids' friends, the acquaintances you keep meaning to get dinner with. We all have our secrets to keeping marriage alive. Ours just happens to be getting away with. I'm trying to avoid saying that word because I don't think YouTube likes it. So going into this book, I think again, it's just my expectations were not correct, because I went into it thinking that it was going to be like a very fast-paced, interesting like thriller, and it's not really. This book more focuses on like the family dynamic and the feelings and the characters that are kind of put in this situation, if that makes sense. Like, it did still have some suspense and it was still like a tiny bit thrilling here and there, but overall I feel like it honestly kind of read more fiction with like a little bit of suspense, and it was just a lot less interesting as I thought it was going to be, so I ended up rating it 3.5. It's still a good book, like I still enjoyed it. It's just my expectations going into it weren't what they should have been, but I think that this is another one that is really good for people who are wanting to get into thrillers. I think also maybe my expectations are just too high, and maybe I need to start looking into more like horror than thrillers, because I feel like a lot of the thrillers that I've been reading lately have been very minimally thrilling, I guess I would say, and I just want things that are like more intense and like heart palpitating, you know? The next 3-ish star that I had is Gone Girl, and this is the other book that I read in my Reading the Most Popular Thrillers of All Time video. This one I ended up rating I think a 3.75. Going into this one, I again with my expectations, I just had really high expectations for this book because it is, again, one of the most popular thrillers of all time, and it has a bunch of really amazing ratings on Goodreads. Now, this book, it follows our two main characters who are married, and his wife ends up going missing, and pretty much everybody thinks that he did it. This book is so messed up. Like, our characters are just both like very, very unlikable, and there's just so much petty drama, and they're both very unhinged. Her more so than him, but this is one of those books where if you like support women's wrongs, you know, like this is a book for you. I feel like this book was just way too long. It's about 400 pages, and I think that it definitely could have actually, I think it might be over 400 pages. Yeah, it's over 400 pages, and I definitely think it could have been 300 pages and it would have been fine. I just feel like there was a lot of times in this book where I was like, okay, is this really adding anything to the story? There wasn't even necessarily like very many plot twists. It was more just like drama, like 400 pages of just drama, and it was okay for me. It wasn't great, it wasn't bad, but it didn't hit like I thought it would. The next one I have is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and this one I read for my book roulette video with the book girlies again when we went to Portland, and this was Ashlyn's pick for me. This book, I ended up rating it, I just messed up a page. I ended up rating it a 4-star. I think I'm like teetering on 3.75 and 4-star because this book is technically like, there are like 4 short stories kind of, but they all have like something to do with each other because it's just following the 4 different people who went to this coffee shop to time travel. And so pretty much what this book is about is it's a cozy fiction where there is this coffee shop that is said to be able to take you back in time, but you can only travel back in time for as long as your coffee stays warm, so you have to be back before the coffee gets cold. This one, the first 2 characters that we're following, they were like cute, but I didn't really care much for their stories. And it was the 3rd and 4th characters' stories that I feel like I was more invested in. It definitely explores the question of like, what would you do if you could go back in time and like say different things or do different things? What I got out of this book is that you shouldn't take any moment for granted, and that you should always say what you need to say and do what you want to do, because you just never know when it'll be like your last chance to do that thing, you know? So this was very cute, very thought-provoking, very profound in certain ways. I overall just had a good time with it. It wasn't like a favorite, but it was definitely cute and cozy, and I would still definitely recommend this book. Okay, going up to my like 4 and 5-star reads. Well, actually, I think I have one more 3.75, and that is the Unhoneymooners. This one I also read for my reading wedding themed books video. This one, I absolutely loved the first half of this book, and then I didn't really love the second half of this book, so I didn't really know what to rate it, because I was going to rate it like a 4.5 star, but then I just don't know if the second part of this book can justify that rating still. In this book, we're following our 2 main characters who are in a wedding party, and everybody in the wedding party except for them gets like major food poisoning, so the honeymoon trip is like up for grabs, and they're actually rivals. So these two rivaling characters take this honeymoon trip, and they think like, oh, we're just going to like go our separate ways, do our own thing, and it'll be like we're not there together, but obviously they end up falling for each other. I don't know, midway through this book they come back from the trip, and I feel like the plot just takes a twist and follows kind of something else, and I just didn't really care for how the story went after the second half. But I love these authors' writing. I loved the banter. Like, I giggled, I was swooning, like it was so fun. And I did love like the vacation element in this book, but yeah, I don't know, that second half just kind of ruined it. Not ruined it for me, but it definitely like took my rating down and wasn't exactly what I would have wanted from this book. But the first half, at least, the first half was like a 5-star. So I don't know, do with that as you will. Okay, now getting into my 4 and 5-star reads. So not too long ago, I filmed a video where Barnes & Noble employees control what I read for a week, and they chose Project Hail Mary, Dance of Thieves, and The Starless Sea. So I will start with Dance of Thieves because that was the first one that I read in that video. I ended up rating this 4 stars. This book has been on my TBR for so long, and it is a lot of people's 4 and 5-star reads. I've heard so much hype about this. I've heard so many good things about this book. So going into it, my expectations were obviously high just because of all of those ratings and everything that I like heard about this book. I really enjoyed like the first chunk of this book. There was forced proximity, the banter was amazing. I loved some of their conversations. Like, it was so swoon worthy, I guess I would say. I don't know, like I was just like, oh, this is so cute, and I was just having a really good time with it. And then I feel like after like the first chunk, this book just got really slow, and the plot wasn't really what I thought it was going to be. And it was just like a lot lower stakes, I guess, than I thought it was going to be. And then when the plot twist came, or like not the plot twist, but like when the climax came, when the reveal came, whatever you want to call it, I felt like that part of the story was kind of like forgotten about, so I didn't really care for that. And I don't know, it just wasn't really like a very like moment, you know? I still really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed seeing like the character developments. I really liked the relationships in this book. There's kind of like a found family trope, and by the end of it I really loved our main characters together, and it got me excited for the next book. But overall it wasn't my favorite, and it wasn't what I was expecting from it, so it let me down a tiny bit, but I also like at the same time still really enjoyed it, just in a different way than I thought that I was going to, if that makes sense. And then next I read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, and this one I ended up giving a 4-star as well. This one I don't even know how to explain it. It was just like a complete fever dream of a novel, and I couldn't even tell you exactly like what happens in this book. All I know is that it was just so magical, and I was just like so sucked into this world, and I feel like the atmosphere was done so beautifully. The plot itself and like what was actually going on was so hard to follow, if I'm being honest. Like I was so lost a lot of the time, but the characters and the world and the atmosphere made up for that, and I feel like I will just forever be like living in this world. And this is definitely an extremely good fall read, just because of how like atmospheric it is. So that's kind of all I have to say about that book. And then I read Project Hail Mary, and this is one of my new like all-time favorite books. But I will say, going into this, I thought it was going to be like a more serious, high stakes, you know, really scientific sci-fi type of book. But no, like it is high stakes. Like my heart was palpitating a lot through this book, but it's a lot more like cozy and funny and wholesome than I thought it was going to be, and that is not what I had heard about this. But like no one told me that it was going to be like cute and funny and cozy, as well as like really high stakes and sciencey. This one's about a guy who pretty much wakes up in space. He doesn't remember why he's there, who he is. Pretty much the world is in his hands at the moment, or I guess the fate of the world is in his hands. So I don't know, this book was just so interesting, and I just ate up every single page of this book. There is an adorable character that I can't say anything about because that would be spoiling things, but I just loved that character, and I loved the relationship that our main character and that character kind of developed. And this was just so fun, so cozy, high stakes. It was just everything that I love in a good book. And then my most recent read, and my most recent 5-star read, is The Spell Shop. This one technically is an October read, but I don't think I'm going to be doing a reading wrap up for a while, so I just wanted to add it in anyway. This book is so good. It is so cozy. Like I said in my, I think I did read this in like one of my most recent videos in my like cozy fall reading vlog. This book is a lot of vibes and very little plot, and I usually don't like reading those types of books, but this book was so magical. The world was so fun. The characters were so lovable. The relationships were so beautiful. It follows our main character Keela, and Keela has a little assistant who is a sentient spider plant, so that in itself was such a fun element to this book. But they work in a big library in the capital of, you know, their world. There's like the resistance or the rebellion or whatever you want to call it, and so there was like a lot of fires that are starting within the city, and like the city is just not really safe anymore. So she and Kaz, who is the sentient spider plant, they flee to her hometown, which is on an island, you know, further away from the capital. With her, she has a bunch of illegal spell books because she saved the book from the library that was burning when she fled. And in her new hometown, she decides to open a little jam shop to disguise the fact that she wanted to sell spells that will remedy the land, because the land is not doing very well after the people of the capital kind of like forgot about it. But this book just shows Keela kind of like getting out of her very like lonely and isolated lifestyle and learning relationships and community, and it's so fun, so magical. I loved it so much and could not recommend this book more. But definitely have the right expectations going into it, because like I said, it is just a very cozy and slower read, but still a very good one. Wow, I feel like I've been yapping for years. But those are all the books that I have read in the last 2 months or so. Let me know what your favorite books have been over the last couple months. Let me know what your 5-star reads have been, because as we all know, I'm constantly adding to my TBR, and I love when you guys recommend your 5-star reads for me to read. I love you guys so much. I'm going to stop yapping now, and I will see you guys in my next video. Mwah!